Who let her in here? This is a closed session. Someone call security. I don't care if she registered. She does not belong in this room. The man who said that was standing at the front of a conference room on the 14th floor of the Hargrove Capitol building in downtown Atlanta. His name was Preston Cahill. He was 61 years old, had a firm handshake, a $3,000 suit, and the particular kind of confidence that comes not from being right, but from never having been told he was wrong. He looked at the woman who had just walked through the door. He looked at her the way some people look at a scratch on a new car. Like the problem was obvious. Like she should already know to leave. The woman's name was Eloise Vann. She was 54 years old. She had walked into that room carrying a leather portfolio that had seen better decades, wearing a blazer she'd bought at a Goodwill in Memphis 12 years ago and kept because it still fit and still looked good. Her shoes were clean. Her posture was the kind you don't fake. She had driven 4 hours from Macon that morning, left before the sun came up, stopped once for gas and coffee, and arrived 7 minutes early to a competition that Preston Cahill had just decided, without asking a single question, she had no business entering. She looked at him. She didn't look away. I registered in January, she said. Confirmation number is in the folder if you need it. She set the folder on the table closest to the door and sat down. The room went quiet in a way that rooms go quiet when something has happened that everyone saw. But no one is sure they're allowed to acknowledge. There were 11 other people in that room. They were there for the same reason Eloise was the Southeast Regional Small Business Innovation Award, hosted annually by the Hargrove Capital Group, which came with a $60,000 grant and a 2-year mentorship contract with one of the most influential investment firms south of Washington. Preston Cahill was the chair of the selection committee. He had been chair for 6 years. He had never in those 6 years selected a winner who looked like Eloise Vann. Nobody in the room said anything. One man near the window shifted in his seat. A young woman with a yellow legal pad pretended to write something down. Preston Cahill straightened his jacket. Fine, he said. We'll get started. What nobody in that room knew, what Preston Cahill had not bothered to find out before opening his mouth, was that Eloise Vann had been building things since she was 9 years old. She grew up in a small house in Macon, Georgia, the third of 5 children. Her mother worked nights at a textile plant. Her father drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain until his knees gave out, and then he drove one anyway because there was no alternative. The house was loud and small and always slightly too hot in summer and slightly too cold in winter. And Eloise did her homework at the kitchen table after dinner because that was the only flat surface available, and the light was better there. She was not the kind of child anyone would have pointed to and said, that one. She was not the loudest. She was not the prettiest. She was not particularly fast at anything that other people could see. What she was, though, was relentless in a way that didn't look like relentlessness from the outside. It looked like patience. It looked like sitting still. It looked like the kind of quiet that adults misread as shyness. At 11, she figured out that the corner store near her school was selling produce 2 days past its prime and charging full price. She started a notebook, not because anyone told her to, just because she noticed things and writing them down made the noticing feel useful. At 14, she wrote a 3-page letter to the owner of that store, a man named Mr. Jessup, who smelled like pipe tobacco and had a way of looking over your head when you talked to him, and told him exactly what he was doing wrong and exactly how he could fix it. She slid it under the door on a Tuesday morning. Mr. Jessup never acknowledged the letter, but 2 weeks later, the produce was fresher. She filed that away too. She went to college on a Pell Grant and 2 part-time jobs, one at a copy shop, one cleaning office buildings on weekends. She graduated with a degree in business administration and a GPA that would have gotten her recruited by half the firms in Atlanta if she had been a different kind of person walking out of a different kind of school. She was not. So she built her own. Vann Community Supply started in 2003 in a rented warehouse space the size of a 2-car garage. The idea was simple: provide small Black-owned restaurants and food businesses in central Georgia with bulk purchasing access that only larger operations could normally afford. Cut out the middlemen, lower the cost of ingredients, keep the margin in the community. The concept was straightforward. The execution nearly killed her. The first year, she ran out of operating capital in October. She sold her car. She took a part-time bookkeeping job at a dental office to cover rent. She kept the warehouse. In the second year, she brought in 2 clients who became 10 and 10 who became 40. By 2009, in the middle of a recession that was swallowing businesses whole, Vann Community Supply had expanded to 3 distribution hubs and was generating enough revenue that Eloise could finally stop doing the books herself. By 2024, she employed 63 people, served over 200 clients across 4 states, and had been written about in Black Enterprise, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and a Harvard Business School case study that she had not known existed until someone emailed her the link. She had never won a major industry award. She had never been invited to speak at a conference she hadn't found herself. She had applied for the Southeast Regional Small Business Innovation Award twice before. Both times, she received a form letter. Both times, she rewrote her application, tightened it, made it better, and applied again. This was her 3rd year. The format of the competition was a 2-day event. Day 1 was a written presentation review and preliminary Q&A. Day 2 was a live pitch in front of the full selection committee. 12 members, chaired by Preston Cahill, followed by deliberation and announcement. On Day 1, Eloise sat through the preliminaries and answered every question with the kind of clarity that comes from knowing your numbers the way a musician knows their instrument. Not because you've memorized them, but because you understand what they mean and why they move the way they do. The committee member who asked her about her supply chain logistics. A woman named Dr. Anita Sessoms, who had the careful, measured energy of someone who had been underestimated in rooms like this one and had long since stopped being surprised by it, leaned forward slightly when Eloise answered and did not lean back. Preston Cahill asked her one question on Day 1. He asked if she had brought audited financials. She had. He did not look at them. That night, Eloise ate dinner alone at a diner 2 blocks from the hotel. She ordered the meatloaf because it came with 2 sides, and she hadn't eaten since the coffee that morning. She sat at the counter and read through her pitch notes one more time, not because she needed to, but because the ritual of it steadied her. She knew what she was going to say. She had known since January. What she was thinking about, sitting at that counter with her fork in her hand, was the look on Preston Cahill's face when she walked in. She had seen that look before. She had seen it from bank officers and landlords and vendors who quoted her twice the market rate and then acted surprised when she knew the market rate. She had seen it from people at industry events who asked if she was catering. She had seen it in the specific, practiced blankness of people who had already decided and were just waiting for the interaction to end. She was not angry. That's the part that would be hardest to explain to someone who hadn't lived it. The absence of surprise. What she felt, sitting at that diner counter, was something more like a low, steady hum. The kind that lives behind your sternum when you've been doing this long enough. It wasn't resignation. It was preparation. She left a good tip and walked back to the hotel. Day 2. The room was fuller. The full 12-member committee was seated at a long table at the front. Cahill was in the center. There were observers along the back wall, staff from the Hargrove Group, a few local journalists, 2 people Eloise recognized from the business school at Georgia State. 12 competitors would pitch over the course of the morning. Eloise was 7th. The first 6 went the way these things go. Some were polished. One was nervous in a way that made the room uncomfortable on his behalf. One had a slide deck that clearly cost more than Eloise's first warehouse lease. Preston Cahill took notes throughout, his pen moving in short, decisive strokes, like he'd already written the conclusion and was just filling in documentation. When they called Eloise's name, she stood up, gathered her materials, and walked to the front of the room. She did not use a slide deck. She had considered it. She had built 142 slides, clean design, the kind of visual framework that business school graduates tend to find reassuring. She had looked at it the night before and taken it off her laptop. What she had instead was a single printed sheet, one for each committee member, which she placed in front of them before she began. It contained 3 things: a 1-page summary of her business model, 5 years of verified financial data, and a single paragraph. 8 sentences, describing what her company had done for the communities it served in concrete, numbered terms. She let them look at it for 30 seconds. Then she started talking. In 2018, she said, a restaurant owner in Augusta named May Pulliam almost had to close her business. She'd been open 11 years. She fed about 200 people a day, lunch and dinner, mostly working families in her neighborhood. The problem wasn't her food. It wasn't her customers. It was her food costs. They had gone up 31% in 2 years, and she had no leverage to negotiate, because she was ordering small and the distributors knew it. She found us in February of that year. By June, her per-unit cost on staples had dropped by 22%. May Pulliam is still open. She's got a second location now on the other side of town. I'm going to tell you how that happened. And then I'm going to tell you why it's happened 214 more times. And then I'm going to ask for the resources to make it happen 214 times more. The room was quiet, not the polite quiet of people waiting for the next slide. A different kind of quiet. Preston Cahill was looking at a sheet. He turned it over, as if checking for something on the back. There was nothing on the back. Eloise kept going. She talked about the mechanics of cooperative bulk purchasing and why it had never scaled properly in underserved markets before, not because the model didn't work, but because the trust infrastructure hadn't existed. And trust infrastructure didn't get built by outside investors who showed up with term sheets. It got built by people who lived in the community long enough to be known. She talked about the 3 distribution hubs and the logistics routing system her team had built from scratch when the commercial options cost more than they could afford. She talked about the 63 people on her payroll and where they had come from, several of them former clients whose restaurants had stabilized enough that they wanted to be part of the operation rather than just recipients of it. She talked for 19 minutes. When she finished, she stood still for a moment. Dr. Sessoms was the first to speak. How are you managing the relationships with the regional suppliers who were losing business when you came in? That's always been the friction point in models like this. It was a good question, the kind of question that comes from having read the sheet, not skimmed it. Eloise answered it. She answered the 3 questions that followed. She answered one from a committee member near the end of the table who had not spoken until that point, and whose question was the sharpest one anyone asked all morning. Then she sat down. Preston Cahill had not asked her a single question. He had not looked up from his sheet again after the first time he turned it over. The deliberation was closed. The competitors waited in a side room that had folding chairs and a table with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Eloise poured a cup anyway. She stood near the window. Outside, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does on a Tuesday in spring. Traffic moving in its usual slow logic, pigeons on the ledge of the parking structure across the street, a delivery truck idling at the corner with its flashers on. One of the other competitors, a younger man, maybe 35, who had pitched a logistics software platform and done it well, came and stood near her. "You were really good," he said. "Thank you." That story about the restaurant, the one in Augusta. He shook his head a little. "I almost forgot you were pitching." She looked at him. "That's the point." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. His name was Gregory Ash. He would go on to win a regional prize the following year. And when he gave his acceptance speech, he would reference a conversation he had at a folding table with a woman who explained to him that a pitch is not a performance, it's a transfer of belief. He would not name her. He would not be able to remember her name, but he would carry the idea for the rest of his career. Eloise did not know any of that standing at that window. She finished her cold coffee and waited. They were called back in at 12:47 in the afternoon. The committee was already seated. Preston Cahill had a folder in front of him. The room had gotten warmer, the building's air system running slightly behind the number of bodies it was asked to cool. Someone had opened a window near the back. Cahill stood. "I want to begin by thanking everyone for their participation," he said. The committee reviewed all 12 presentations carefully. The deliberation was thorough. The decision was, he paused, not unanimous. That last phrase landed differently than he'd probably intended. A few people shifted. Dr. Mtern, Sessoms looked straight ahead. The 2024 Southeast Regional Small Business Innovation Award, Cahill continued, goes to... He looked down at the folder. He opened it. He read the name. He stopped. He read it again. What happened in the next 3 seconds was something that everyone in that room would describe differently later. But the common thread in every account was this. Preston Cahill's face did something it had not done in 6 years of chairing that committee. It lost its certainty. Just for a moment, just long enough for the people watching to notice that something had not gone the way he expected. The award, he said, and his voice had a different quality now, something slightly flatter, slightly more careful, goes to Eloise Vann, founder and CEO of Vann Community Supply, Macon, Georgia. The applause started from the left side of the room and moved right, and by the time it reached the back wall, it was the kind of applause that doesn't sound polite. It sounds like relief. Eloise stood up. She did not rush to the front of the room. She moved the way she had always moved through spaces that were not built with her in mind, with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who knows they are supposed to be there even when the room has not caught up to that fact yet. When she reached the front and turned to face the room, she looked at the 12 people at the table. She thanked Dr. Sessoms by name. She thanked the committee member who had asked the sharpest question. She thanked Gregory Ash for the conversation by the window, which made him look up in mild surprise. She did not thank Preston Cahill. She didn't do it pointedly. She didn't skip over him in a way that announced the skip. She simply didn't include him, the way you don't include weather in a speech about a journey. It was there. It was a factor. It was not the point. Cahill sat with his hands flat on the folder. 3 things happened in the weeks after the award that are worth knowing. The first, the Hargrove Capital Group received a complaint from Preston Cahill, submitted in writing to the board, arguing that the selection process had been compromised by external pressure and requesting a review. The board reviewed his complaint for 11 days. They found no evidence of compromise. What they found, in reviewing the deliberation notes, was that 8 of the 12 committee members had ranked Eloise Vann first. The decision had not been close. Cahill had ranked her last. The second, a journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, who had been sitting along the back wall at the awards ceremony, reached out to Eloise for an interview. The interview ran 12 days later, on a Sunday, in the business section. The headline was not dramatic. It was, "A Macon businesswoman built a supply network that's feeding communities across the South. Here's how." The article ran long. Eloise's phone did not stop for 2 weeks. The third, May Pulliam, the restaurant owner from Augusta, the one Eloise had mentioned in her pitch, the one with 11 years and 200 people a day, and the second location, May Pulliam drove to Macon on a Thursday in May with a pan of peach cobbler and left it with the receptionist at the Vann Community Supply office. The note attached said, "We don't say thank you enough. This is a start." Eloise found the cobbler on her desk when she got back from a meeting. She read the note twice. She set it down. She sat for a moment in the chair she'd had since the warehouse on 4th Street, the one with the cracked armrest she'd been meaning to replace for a decade, and she let the room be quiet. Then she picked up her phone and called May Pulliam back. They talked for 45 minutes. That's a longer call than either of them expected, but neither of them was surprised by it. I keep thinking about the moment Preston Cahill opened that folder and read the name. Not the applause after, not the article in the Journal-Constitution, not the cobbler on the desk. That specific moment, when a man who had already made up his mind had to say out loud that he was wrong, is the part I can't stop returning to. Because that moment didn't happen by accident. It happened because of everything Eloise Vann did before she ever walked into that room. What gets me about her story is how little of it was dramatic from the outside. She didn't argue with Cahill when he tried to have her removed. She didn't make a scene, didn't demand an apology, didn't announce what she knew about her own numbers. She sat down, put her folder on the table, and waited for the room to catch up. That takes something. Not just patience. Patience is passive. What Eloise had was a kind of grounded certainty about who she was and what she built, and it was so solid that no one else's opinion of it could shake the foundation. That's not something you perform. That's something you earn quietly, over 20 years of decisions that nobody was watching. I think about what it actually takes to build what she built. Starting in a warehouse the size of a two-car garage, selling your car in October of your first year because the operating capital ran out and the warehouse mattered more than the transportation, doing other people's books on weekends to keep the lights on, and still showing up Monday morning to the thing you actually believe in. There's a word for that, and it's not talent, and it's not luck. It's the decision, made over and over again in private, to keep going when no one is asking you to. Most people don't see those decisions. They only see the person who walks into a room 20 years later and doesn't flinch. The thing about Cahill is that he made his judgment based on a category. He saw what Eloise looked like, where she came from, what she was wearing, and he decided the conclusion before the evidence. That's not just unfair, it's a failure of thinking. It's what happens when a person stops being curious about the world and starts just sorting it. And the bitter irony is that his certainty about who didn't belong in the room was exactly what made him the least qualified person in it. Eloise didn't win because she was lucky enough to find a fair judge. She won because the work was real. The numbers were real, and 8 out of 12 people in that room were still doing their jobs with enough honesty to recognize it. She gave them something to recognize it. That's the part that was entirely within her control. I think about May Pulliam driving to Macon with a pan of peach cobbler. I think about that being the part of the story that gets me the most. Not the award, not the article, not Cahill's face when he read the name. Just a woman who'd been helped putting something warm on a desk and writing, "We don't say thank you enough." That's what the work was actually for. Not the $60,000, not the mentorship contract, not proving a point to a man in a $3,000 suit. The point was May Pulliam's second location, the 200 people a day, the 63 people on payroll, the communities that didn't get written about in business journals but got fed anyway. Do right by the work. Understand it deeply enough that no one can take it from you, and keep going long enough that the room eventually has no choice but to catch up. That's the whole thing. That's all of it.